Bonnie Tyler. What if the very last thing someone posts online has nothing to do with saying goodbye, and everything to do with saying thank you? No warning, no farewell speech. Just an ordinary update from someone who fully expected there'd be another one tomorrow. That's exactly what happened here, and once you know how the story ends, that ordinary little post turns into something you can't stop thinking about. Picture this. It's the 1st of May. If you'd scrolled through this woman's Instagram that day, nothing, absolutely nothing, would have told you the world was only weeks away from losing her. No cryptic caption, no teary goodbye, no hint that one of the most unmistakable voices in music history was quietly living out the final chapter of her life. Instead, she did what she'd done 1,000 times before. She shared some music. Bonnie Tyler's very last public post wasn't about hospitals. It wasn't about pain, or fear, or endings. It was about a brand new song called One World, One Home, written for a documentary about homelessness. She thanked the people who made it happen, talked about how proud she was to be part of something bigger than herself, and encouraged her followers to give it a listen. That was it. Just another update from an artist who, even in her 70s, still refused to stop creating. Nobody reading that post treated it as anything special. Why would they? It looked exactly like dozens of posts before it. But now, looking back, fans read every word differently. Not because Bonnie was secretly telling everyone goodbye. There's zero evidence she had any idea what was coming. It's because grief has this strange power to rewrite the meaning of ordinary things after someone's gone. That post, barely noticed at the time, has become something else entirely. An accidental farewell that never meant to be one. And maybe that's exactly why it stings so much. For nearly 5 decades, Bonnie Tyler was a woman who never seemed capable of standing still. She toured continent after continent, packed out arenas, and somehow made the same songs feel brand new to every generation that discovered them. People who fell in love with her voice back in 1977 played her records for their kids. Those kids grew up and played them for their own kids. That kind of staying power is rare. Artists who are still writing new music in their 70s, even rarer. And Bonnie wasn't interested in coasting on nostalgia. Right up until everything changed, she was still looking forward, not back. Just months before her health took a turn, she was talking publicly about upcoming shows, staying active, and how much she still loved being on stage. The people around her described her as upbeat, energized, genuinely excited about what was next. Fans were already snapping up tickets for a European run, expecting another summer with that voice, the one that always sounded powerful and fragile in the same breath. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, hinting that her calendar was about to be wiped clean. That's part of what makes this story hit differently. Usually, when someone's story is nearing its end, there are signs. A farewell tour gets announced, a tell-all interview drops, someone plans their own goodbye. This wasn't that. Bonnie's final message wasn't asking anyone to remember her. It was asking people to think about someone else entirely. Once you notice that detail, it's hard to unsee it. The song she was pushing that week carries a title that now feels almost too on the nose. One World, One Home. Home was never the stage for Bonnie. Never the flash of cameras or the roar of a crowd. Home was a quieter life in Portugal, alongside her husband, Robert Sullivan, the man who knew her long before Bonnie Tyler ever meant anything to the rest of us. To millions, she was a legend. To Robert, she was still the young Welsh woman, with big dreams, and a voice nobody had heard yet, the one who'd laugh over breakfast, and still get genuinely excited, walking into a studio after 50 years in the business. That's exactly why her final message feels so personal now. It wasn't about awards or legacy. It was about kindness. About people. About home. Nobody saw what was coming. Not her fans, not the journalists, probably not even the people closest to her. Within days, everything shifted. The concerts still sitting on the calendar quietly started disappearing. The future she'd been so confidently talking about became something far less certain. And that little post, the one almost nobody paid attention to when it first went up, became the message millions of people would return to once they learned she was gone. When that post first appeared, hardly anyone treated it as more than routine. Just another release, from a legend who refused to quit. That had always been part of who she was. She never became one of those artists who only lives inside old memories. She kept chasing songs that actually meant something to her. Maybe that's exactly why this particular song feels so different in hindsight. It was never written as a goodbye. It was written to tell someone else's story. The track anchored a documentary called Homeless, directed by Valerio Zanoli, which turned its lens toward people living without shelter. The kind of stories that get ignored until they become statistics. Bonnie signed on because she believed that message deserved to be heard. A lot of artists reach a certain age and start treating every project as a way to protect their own legacy. Bonnie seemed far more interested in handing her voice to a cause that had nothing to do with her own fame. She wasn't repackaging her old hits or asking anyone to relive the 80s. She was lending one of the most recognizable voices in music to people who rarely get one at all. Listen to the lyrics now, and they almost seem to belong to a different conversation entirely. Not because they predicted anything, but because they echo something Bonnie genuinely valued. Home, belonging, standing beside one another, finding dignity in people the world too often looks past. Those words were written for a film about homelessness. But after Bonnie's passing, plenty of fans admitted they can't hear the song the same way anymore. Almost overnight, it stopped sounding like a soundtrack and started sounding like the closing page of an extraordinary career. That shift happened fast. The day the post went up, people liked it and scrolled on with their lives. After the news of her death broke, thousands went back, not because the words had changed, but because they had. That's what loss does. It rewrites ordinary moments without asking permission. And suddenly, everything carries more weight, simply because you know there won't be another one. Was there any part of Bonnie that sensed what was coming? Every account from the people around her says no. Quite the opposite, actually. She was still making plans, still talking about future shows, still excited about projects she hoped people would love. Nothing in how she showed up publicly suggested a woman getting ready to say goodbye forever. And honestly, that might be the saddest part of all. There was no carefully written farewell letter tucked away somewhere. No hidden clues waiting to be decoded. Just a singer doing what she'd done for nearly 50 years. Sharing music. There's something deeply human about how simple that is. Across her career, Bonnie Tyler wrote songs that carried people through heartbreak, loneliness, weddings, long drives, hard nights, and memories people never forgot. Without meaning to, she left behind one more song that fans will forever associate with a completely different kind of feeling. Not because it topped any charts, but because it turned out to be the last time millions of people heard her speaking to them directly. There's something quietly beautiful in that. Her final public words weren't asking anyone to remember Bonnie Tyler the icon. They were asking people to remember those who usually have nobody speaking up for them at all. Even while the world was hearing that message, Bonnie herself was still looking ahead, fully expecting another rehearsal, another crowd, another night under the lights. None of her fans, none of her friends, maybe not even Bonnie herself, understood that the hardest chapter of her story hadn't even started yet. Here's the part that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. In her final months, Bonnie wasn't slowing down. She wasn't giving interviews that sounded like goodbyes. If anything, she sounded more excited than ever. One of her last television appearances came just weeks before everything changed. A relaxed sit-down with a British breakfast show host, where Bonnie laughed easily, talked touring, and even joked about how unglamorous royalty checks actually are, gently correcting the assumption that a song as massive as Total Eclipse of the Heart must have made her impossibly rich. Classic her. Honest, funny, zero pretense. No self-pity, no dramatic speeches, just an artist talking shop the way she always had. Friends often said Bonnie genuinely loved performing, not because she needed applause to feel important, but because the stage felt like home to her. She used to say that as long as her health held up, she planned to keep singing. And by every account, she truly believed that. Earlier that year, she'd talked about staying active and feeling stronger after some minor procedures. Her go-to line during interviews was simple: "If you've got your health, you've got everything." Reading that back now is genuinely hard, not because it turned out to be prophetic, but because she meant every word of it. She believed she had time. Her schedule backed that up. Shows were already booked across Germany, Austria, the UK, Hungary, Romania, and Turkey, and fans had been booking travel for months. For a lot of them, catching a Bonnie Tyler show wasn't just a concert. It was a reunion with a voice that had soundtracked birthdays, weddings, breakups, and 40 years of memories. She was gearing up for those nights exactly like she always had. Rehearsals, packing, new songs mixed in with the old favorites. Nothing suggested any of those dates would quietly vanish from her calendar. She'd also released another new single that same spring, not because anyone demanded it, but because she was still an artist, full stop. A lot of performers spend their later years carefully protecting what they've already built. Bonnie kept creating instead, still wanting people to hear something they hadn't heard yet. She wasn't living in yesterday. She was still building tomorrow. That's probably why her death hit so many people outside her own generation so hard. This wasn't someone who'd quietly faded from public life years ago. She was still visible, still recording, still planning, still cracking jokes in interviews, still thanking fans after shows. Just weeks before she got sick, she posted videos about how excited she was to perform again across Germany and Austria, telling fans she couldn't wait for more special nights together. That doesn't sound like someone closing a chapter. It sounds like someone opening a new one. That optimism is exactly what makes everything afterward feel so heavy. Sometimes, life doesn't send out a warning before it flips everything upside down. Sometimes tomorrow just disappears without permission. No farewell tour, no final encore, no carefully staged goodbye. Just ordinary plans that suddenly couldn't happen anymore. For Bonnie, the future still looked wonderfully normal. More music, more crowds, more roads, more nights on stage. She had no way of knowing that within a matter of weeks, all of it would be replaced by something no amount of rehearsal could prepare anyone for. The first warning signs didn't show up on a stage or in a studio. They showed up at home, where pain that seemed manageable at first quietly kicked off a chain of events nobody, not Bonnie, not Robert, not the millions waiting to see her live again, could have seen coming. There's a specific kind of memory families carry more clearly than the day the bad news actually lands. The last completely normal day. The last breakfast that felt routine. The last "see you later" that meant exactly that and nothing more. Nobody can pinpoint exactly when that moment happened for Bonnie and Robert, but everything we know suggests neither of them believed they were standing at the edge of a goodbye. For decades, Bonnie split her time between Wales and Portugal, and their place in the Algarve had become real life, not just a holiday home. Somewhere she could escape the pressure of touring and wake up without cameras or anyone asking her to perform. People close to her described those years as some of her happiest. Then, sometime in late April, things changed. It didn't start with headlines. It started with pain. Reports say Bonnie developed severe abdominal pain at home in Portugal. At first, almost no one outside her closest circle grasped how serious it had become. Doctors soon discovered she had a perforated intestine, one of the most dangerous abdominal emergencies there is, since infection can spread fast if it's not treated immediately. Emergency surgery followed. That was only the beginning. Afterward, doctors placed her in a medically induced coma, giving her body the best possible shot at surviving both the trauma and the infection. For fans, that news alone was terrifying. For Robert, it must have felt like it would never end. No cameras trailed him through hospital hallways. No reporter recorded those long hours of waiting. Nobody could truly capture what it's like watching someone you've loved for over 50 years fight a battle you're powerless to fight for them. All anyone could do was wait. Weeks passed. Then something shifted the tone of the whole story. An official statement went up on Bonnie's website. She was no longer in a coma. She was awake. Still in intensive care. Still described as seriously unwell. But there was real hope now. Doctors believed recovery was possible, even if it would be slow. Her family thanked fans everywhere for their prayers. confirmed her summer shows were being cancelled or postponed, and stayed cautiously hopeful the autumn tour could still happen. Read that statement now, and one thing's painfully clear: nobody was preparing fans for a farewell. They were preparing them to be patient. Every line pointed toward recovery. Not a guarantee, just recovery. Fans genuinely believed they'd see her again. Promoters expected to reschedule dates. Even the press had started describing her condition as improving. Here's the hardest thing about hope: it quietly rebuilds tomorrow before you even notice it happening. Maybe she'll be back by autumn. Maybe she's already turning a corner. Hope doesn't erase fear entirely. It just gives fear somewhere to hide for a while. And for a moment, it genuinely looked like Bonnie Tyler might do what she'd done so many times across her extraordinary life: survive. She'd survived setbacks. She'd survived surgery that permanently altered her voice early in her career. She'd reinvented herself more than once already. Why wouldn't she pull through this too? Nobody imagined that hopeful recovery update would eventually become the second-to-last chapter, instead of the ending itself. Looking back, plenty of fans describe those weeks as filled with cautious optimism. They kept checking for updates. They waited. They genuinely believed they were simply waiting for Bonnie to come home. None of them realized that while the world waited for a comeback announcement, time was quietly heading toward a goodbye that no official statement had ever suggested was coming. The morning the news finally broke, something unusual happened. People weren't just searching for her biggest hits anymore. They were searching for Bonnie herself, her interviews, her old photos, her concert footage. And almost without meaning to, thousands of people ended up right back at the very last thing she'd ever chosen to share publicly. Same post, same video, same words as always. Except now, everything about it felt completely different. There's a strange ritual that plays out whenever someone beloved passes away. People go backward, rewatching old interviews, replaying half-forgotten performances, scrolling for one more conversation they somehow missed the first time. It's not really curiosity. It's the very human hope that somewhere in those final public moments, there's one more piece of the person we loved. That's exactly what happened here. The post about One World, One Home, which got warm but pretty ordinary attention when it first went up, suddenly became one of the most shared things connected to Bonnie's memory. Thousands of comments poured in from people saying they'd come back to listen after hearing the news, some admitting they'd barely noticed the song the first time and now couldn't get through it without tearing up. What makes that reaction so powerful is how simple it is. Bonnie wasn't trying to leave behind some grand final statement. She was doing what musicians do, inviting people to listen. Only afterward did anyone realize those were the last words she'd ever share publicly. If people had known, they'd have read every sentence more carefully, noticed every smile. Instead, the moment passed quietly, the way ordinary moments always do. Maybe that's exactly why her passing has felt so personal to so many people. Bonnie Tyler never belonged to just one generation. Parents introduced her songs to their kids, who eventually played the same records for their own children. Very few artists stay woven into people's lives for close to 50 years without fading out. Even in her final years, she refused to become just a nostalgia act, still recording, still touring, even teaming up with younger producers on a collaboration that introduced her to a new generation while honoring the song that defined her career. But her biggest achievement probably had very little to do with the charts. People trusted her. There was an honesty about Bonnie that audiences picked up on instantly. She never pretended her life had been perfect, talking openly over the years about disappointment, about growing older, about a miscarriage that changed the course of her life, about the children she never had, and about how much family meant to her. She wasn't interested in performing perfection, and maybe that's exactly why her voice never sounded manufactured. It sounded lived in. Even her final message reflects that same honesty, not because she knew she was leaving, but because she genuinely didn't. Everyone around her says she fully expected to recover. Hope stayed alive right up until, suddenly, it wasn't. When her family finally confirmed that Bonnie had passed away unexpectedly in hospital, millions of people arrived at the same quiet realization at once. There wouldn't be another post. No announcement about a new single. No photo from another rehearsal. No message thanking fans after another show. The conversation had simply ended, and nobody had known they were reading its final page. And somehow, that's become one of the most heartbreaking parts of her story. Not just that she was gone, but that she left doing exactly what she'd always loved most: sharing music, sharing hope, never once imagining that those ordinary words would become the goodbye millions of people would carry with them forever. For most of her life, Bonnie walked off stage the same way, every time. The lights would dim, the applause would fade behind her. Another city would turn into another memory, then she'd go home. That rhythm held for almost 50 years. Concert, home, studio, home, television, home. It was a life built around extraordinary highs, separated by wonderfully ordinary in-between moments. Maybe that's exactly why her final public message feels so unforgettable now. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't crafted to be remembered. It was just another ordinary moment. And somehow, that ordinary moment became the one millions of people keep returning to. In the days after her passing, tributes rolled in from every corner of the music world. Rod Stewart remembered not just her unmistakable voice, but her warmth as a friend. Bryan Adams thanked her for the emotion she brought to songs they'd shared over the years. Actress Catherine Zeta-Jones, whose family connected to Bonnie's through Robert, wrote one of the most personal tributes of all. She remembered Bonnie singing at her wedding, called her hilarious, generous, and full of life, and sent love directly to Robert and the rest of the family. What's striking is what those tributes had in common. Almost none mentioned awards or chart positions. Nearly everyone talked about Bonnie the person, the laughter, the kindness, the energy she brought into every room. Great careers earn admiration. Great people leave behind memories. Bonnie managed to leave both. As fans kept replaying her catalog, plenty noticed something they'd never quite felt before. The songs hadn't changed, but the people listening had. Total Eclipse of the Heart suddenly sounded less like a power ballad and more like a reminder of another era entirely. Even One World, One Home, released only weeks before her death, became almost impossible to separate from the woman who sang it. Not because Bonnie ever intended that, but because life handed those lyrics a meaning nobody could have predicted. Whenever someone famous passes, there's a tendency to measure their success in numbers. Records sold, awards collected, years on stage. Bonnie hit all of those marks. But the rest of her legacy can't really be counted. It lives inside moments that belong to ordinary people. A couple slow dancing in their kitchen after 40 years of marriage. Someone driving home with the radio cranked up, because one familiar song reminds them of somebody they used to love. Friends butchering the high notes at karaoke and laughing about it anyway. That's the kind of legacy very few artists ever manage to leave behind. Bonnie never needed people to memorize the dates of her career. She just needed them to remember how her music made them feel. And judging by the flood of messages that followed her death, they did. Maybe the most moving part of this entire story is that Bonnie never tried to write herself a perfect goodbye. She didn't announce a farewell tour. She didn't sit down for one final tearful interview. She didn't ask anyone to start celebrating her life while she was still living it. Instead, she did what she'd always done. She shared another song. She fully believed there'd be another rehearsal, another crowd, another chance to stand under the lights. Sometimes, the most beautiful endings are the ones that never even realize they're endings. That's exactly why her final message keeps resonating with so many people. It's a reminder that the moments we barely notice today might turn out to be the memories we treasure most tomorrow. For Robert, those memories stretch across more than 5 decades together. For her family, they're deeply personal. For millions of listeners around the world, they live on inside songs that keep playing long after the applause has faded for good. Bonnie Tyler's voice went quiet on July 8, 2026. But every single time someone hits play on one of her songs, a piece of her story quietly starts all over again. And maybe that's the goodbye she never actually needed to write. Because the real final message she left behind was never buried in a headline. It was hiding inside a song, just waiting for the world to hit play one more time. So here's what I'll leave you with. Go listen to that last song she shared. Really listen to it. And if her music has ever meant something to you, a wedding, a breakup, a long drive, a karaoke night you'll never live down, drop it in the comments below. Hit like if this one hit you the way it hit us, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Because the least we can do for the people who gave us the soundtrack to our lives is make sure their story keeps getting told.